The medievals had a lot to fear, and they wanted answers. Answers to the things that were going on in their world. But without the scientific knowledge that we have today, they had to rely on their own imaginations along with myths and stories to make sense of things. The results were a world of magic and a place full of fabulous creatures, witches, angels, and demons. Let's travel back in time and take a look inside the medieval mind at the fears and superstitions they dealt with every day as they tried to navigate their lives. So, you think you know everything about knights, castles, and kings? Well, hold on to your chainmail because we're starting a history channel all about the Roman Empire. Now, I know what you're thinking, wait, Roman Empire, isn't that before my favourite medieval legends? Well, yes, but stick with me. Rome is where it all started. From the fall of the mighty empire to the rise of your medieval knights, it's a story that's all connected. So if you're ready to learn about this incredible time period, join the toga party over at our new channel, the Roman Empire. It's going to be totally worth the detour in your historical journey, so I'll leave a link to it in the description below. And now for today's video, welcome to Medieval Madness. Out of nowhere. In 1188, having travelled around Ireland, the priest and historian Gerald of Wales then wrote Topographia Hibernae. In the treatise, the archdeacon used the barnacle goose myth as evidence of the virgin birth of Jesus. The goose myth was a widely reported misconception about the breeding habits of the barnacle and brant goose. The geese were said to have emerged fully formed from goose barnacles. It was during the 13th century that this theory of spontaneous generation reached the highest level of acceptance. The works of the ancient Greek philosophers Aristotle and Pliny were reintroduced into Western Europe during the Middle Ages. They believed in the principle of vitalism, meaning that new living creatures could be born out of decaying matter. Fleas could materialize out of inanimate matter such as dust, or maggots could arise from rotted flesh. Other creatures that were regarded as unpleasant, such as worms, insects, frogs, snakes, even mammals like rats and mice, were thought to spontaneously appear out of filth rather than sexually reproduce. Many great men believed in the theory. The 7th century theologian Bishop Isidore of Seville, who has been described as the last scholar of the ancient world, which must have been a small list of scholars that year, pointed out that the Latin word for mouse, which is mus, could be derived from the word humus, meaning compost. When the German philosopher Albertus Magnus and his student Thomas Aquinas translated the works of Aristotle into Latin, they became tremendously popular. The 13th century theologians expanded the theory of spontaneous generation, declaring that parasites and vermin were conjured out of dirt from the devil's will. And furthermore, according to the Gospel of Mark, in hell the worms that eat sinners never die. The church really liked the findings of Gerald of Wales and his goose theory. Maybe it wasn't just impure creatures that were spontaneously created. If birds like barnacle geese could appear out of mud and silt, it could be used as direct evidence of the Immaculate Conception. It wasn't until 1668 that the theory of vitalism was disproved. The biologist Francesco Redi placed a piece of rotten meat in a jar and covered it with a cloth. No flies could reach the meat, so no eggs were laid and no maggots appeared. He had proven that spontaneous generation did not work. There were a lot of holy days in Catholic Europe during the Middle Ages, and therefore some serious fasting went on. Lent was a big deal and dragged on for 40 days with no meat allowed. But surely if the barnacle goose could be said to be a fish rather than a fowl because it was born out of the sea, then it could be eaten. Unfortunately, in 1215, Pope Innocent III put a stop to all of the goose pretending to be a fish eaten during holy times, and anyone caught doing it was judged a heretic. Oh well, it was worth a try. Wild Thing. Ralph of Coxall was an English monk, abbot, and chronicler. He died in the early 13th century. Ralph wrote chronicles on the Third Crusade and one about Gerard of Ridefort, a Grand Master of the Knights Templar. He also wrote Chronicon Anglicanum, where he recorded a history of England. He tells one story about some fishermen from Alford in Suffolk. One day in 1161, they caught a strange creature in their nets. Quote, The wild man was completely naked, and all his limbs were formed like those of a man. He was hairy, and his beard was long and pointed. Around the chest, he was very rough and shaggy. The naked merman, as they called him, was dragged off to nearby Orford Castle, where the Governor Bartholomew de Glanville placed him under guard, quote, day and night, and would not allow him to return to the sea. He eagerly ate anything that was brought to him. He devoured fish raw rather than cooked, squeezing the raw fishes in his hands until all of the moisture was removed and then eating them. He did not wish to talk, or rather did not have the power to talk, even when suspended by his feet and tortured. He displayed no knowledge of a Christian God when being led into church. He didn't even bow his head, causing them to believe he was an evil spirit in the body of a drowned sailor. Using nets to enclose him, his imprisoners allowed him back into the sea and watched in amazement at his agility in the water. Despite their precautions, the seaman escaped, but he hung around in the sea for another 2 months before disappearing forever. He has become known as the Wild Man of Orford. Big boys do cry. Today, weeping is mostly associated with femininity, at least in the West. In the Middle Ages, tears were considered to be a powerful and valuable liquid. Why wouldn't they be? They could cure diseases, free souls from purgatory, and even identify liars. They were seen as a sign of piety, bringing the medievals closer to God, an excess of humours, and as an accompaniment to divine visions. In his commentary, Women's Secrets, Albertus Magnus said, quote, women cry a great deal because they have such humidity that their body must expel femininity's material wetness. To Magnus, this was a sign of female ignorance. Of course, the sogginess affected their brains and stopped them from learning. It also pointed to their wickedness because, quote, evil humours leave the body through the eyes, and if all that wetness did not come out through the eyes, then naturally he believed it would impact the womb and cause infertility. Surprisingly, men were also advised to cry a lot. We always imagine knights to be stoic and steadfast, not likely to give in to their emotions, but chivalrous romance novels are full of examples of knights who cried about the deaths of their companions or separation from their lady. There simply wasn't a concept of men don't cry. A knight who was so overcome with grief that he cried and even fainted with emotion was not only accepted, but encouraged. Thought of as a sign of faithfulness, it brought him closer to God, especially if the tears were shed during a church service. Tears were also accepted at the royal courts. An ambassador who addressed the courtiers of the 15th century Duke of Burgundy, Philip the Good, gave such an emotive speech that he not only broke down and cried himself, but all the courtiers were also moved to tears. The custom continued into the 17th century. The English politician Thomas Alured described a speech made by Sir Robert Phillips in 1628 at the House of Commons, when the doomed King Charles I threatened to dissolve Parliament. He said, quote, Sir Robert spoke and mixed his words with tears, and then Sir Edward Coke was forced to sit down when he began to speak through abundant tears, and the Speaker of the House also could not hold back from crying. The Living Dead. You would have thought that with all the superstition flying around in the Middle Ages, that graves would have been treated with a great amount of reverence. However, around 40% of burials in medieval Europe from the middle of the 5th to the middle of the 8th centuries were disturbed. At first, it was thought that grave robbers were the culprits, but most common people were poor and wouldn't have had that many grave goods anyway. Across burials from Switzerland, Germany, and England, some bodies were posed in strange positions with their legs bent or twisted, their feet bound, their hands placed in front of their heads, or turned face down. Some had even been decapitated. The reason? The medievals were fighting zombies, and they were making sure that revenants or the restless dead could not rise from their graves, walk the earth, and harm the living. Some historians believe that by manipulating the bodies, it was hoped that they would stay in the ground, unable to get out. However, not all dead people were considered dangerous. The Germanic tribe of the Langobards are thought to have opened up the graves of their relatives to keep their skulls as mementos. Hence why out of 42 graves in the 6th century cemetery of Brunn am Gebirge, Austria, 38% of them are missing their head. Tribe members believe that their ancestors' skulls would bring good luck. In other graves there are 2 skulls, but only 1 body. The reason for this is unclear, however, tribe members believed that their ancestors' skulls would bring good luck, so perhaps this is the reason. In Poland, as late as the 17th and 18th centuries, people were still taking precautions when it came to vampires. To prevent them from rising from the dead and sucking the blood of family and friends, a suspected vampire was buried with a sickle over their neck or rocks wedged under their chin. Death was everywhere during the Middle Ages, what with hunger, never-ending wars, invasions, and plenty of incurable diseases. So the medievals just weren't as hung up on death as we are today. And anyway, the church preached that life after death was so much better than the hardships suffered in the mortal world. Churchyards were regularly used for meetings and theatrical performances. Fairs might even be held there, or travelling courts. Even sex workers would ply their trade in churchyards. Missing pet. If you regularly watch videos on this channel, you're going to be well aware that during the Middle Ages, women lived under the dark cloud of misogyny. The German clergyman Heinrich Kramer was particularly special when it came to hating women and coming up with ludicrous reasons as to why they should be feared. His 15th century book Malleus Maleficarum is a guide to finding and destroying witches who were predominantly female. Warlocks are only mentioned in passing. According to Kramer, of all the crafty and wicked wiles that witches used, one of the worst was how they went around stealing men's penises during the night. He asked the question, can witches with the help of devils really and actually remove the member? Or whether they only do so apparently by some glamour or illusion. In answer, he says the witnesses have seen that witches can do marvelous things with regard to male organs. Not just make them impotent, but actually make the penis disappear. Why on earth would they want to collect these male organs? Well, to keep them as pets, of course, and put, quote, as many as 20 or 30 members together and put them in a bird's nest or shut them up in a box where they eat oats and corn. One witch must have been feeling particularly generous when one man lost his member as she told him to, quote, climb a certain tree and pick which he liked out of a nest, and when he tried to take a big one, the witch said, you must not take that one, adding because it belonged to a parish priest. If you are in need of such a pet, please don't go climbing any trees looking for nests. Trust me, it's dangerous and you're not going to find anything up there. I've tried. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please do subscribe if you enjoyed this video, as we do release a new one every Friday. So until next time, hope everyone has an amazing week, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers everyone!